First of all, thank you all for being here tonight. And Sarah, thank you for this film. Yeah, I mean, in our introductions and in your introduction, we were touching a bit on like work that you've shown here before, and I think it occurred to me when you first sent us the film, and watching it, it sort of occurred to me that it was simultaneously like an unexpected shift for you towards a more not like classically narrative, but something quite different than what your short films had been like.
People talk this time.
That's true. Yeah. So yeah, I was hoping to begin by hearing a bit about what you think motivated the shift for you, and I don't know. The results are pretty clear, but yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thanks for having us. We're delighted to be here. You know, it's interesting, actually, the sequence is reversed. Familiar Touch took so long to make that I'd actually already written it before producing the short films that were here. And so in a way, that short form work was a way for me to kind of play with different visual modes of creating stories from movement, and then got to sort of kind of deepen that practice and bring it to the feature. So, I mean, that sort of tells you a bit about, you know, micro-budget filmmaking in America. It took 8+ years to make. But I think, you know, one of the greatest joys of the collaboration with the 3 people on this stage is that this was my first time working with professional actors. And coming from a background making movement-based films, I was really nervous to direct dialogue. And part of the generosity of these 3 was that I found that actually we could talk about all of their characters in terms of physicality. So those years making dance films really kind of came into play in working with professional actors for the first time, because I found that we could actually talk about story through gesture, posture, how they moved about the space. So, you know, it's a departure, and also it's kind of a weaving together of these ways that I'd been working in.
Yeah, and since these are the first actors, or like professional actors I've known you to work with, I have a lot of questions for them about working with you. But I wanted to start maybe with Kathleen. What were your initial impressions of Sarah when she brought the project to you? And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like a totally disarming performance. So I doubt you could have foreseen that it would take on that aspect, maybe. But like, yeah, I don't know. Could you just tell us about that initial encounter between the two?
I would like to say that there's one of us missing, Andy McQueen, who said he didn't want to be on the panel because he hadn't seen the movie before. But he's seen the movie now, so if Andy wants to join us.
He plays Brian, the nurse practitioner.
As often happens in this work we do, this happened very quickly. Sarah and I didn't know each other. There were a whole lot of things, and so I actually had my initial meeting with Sarah over Zoom, because it was still in the days of Zoom. 2.5 weeks before the first day of shooting. And I didn't know that I was actually going to be in the movie until the day before the first day of shooting. So, as is often the case, the actors are the last people to enter the collaboration, but we, in the first conversation we had, discovered that we had lots of things in common, none of which had to do with the movement in a way. We had the choreographer Yvonne Rainer in common. I'd worked with Yvonne a lot, and Sarah knew Yvonne's work, and we had both lived an important part of our lives in Italy. And in Rome, and so a lot of our conversation, that first conversation, was in the Italian that people who used to live in Rome speak to each other, because we can understand each other and think we speak Italian really well. But I read the script and was very moved by the script because my best friend, the playwright Sybil Pearson, had just begun the difficult part of dementia. And when I got to work, I got asking if I could come to work the next day in Pasadena, and I said I didn't know that I could come the next day, I could come the day after. So I worked that afternoon. We were doing it before the strikes. We only had 19 days of shooting. Sarah and her collaborators, who had worked together for 10 years, had done such elegant and specific work that it was the easiest collaboration to walk into with 24 hours notice, or maybe sometimes the easiest collaboration I've had lots of them in my life, that I've ever done. And I saw Sarah in real life, standing in an elevator, and we trusted each other immediately.
Yeah, I think. And now, H. Jon and Carolyn, I want to hear about your collaborations with Sarah, and when I was thinking about this film from the perspective of an actor, I was thinking about maybe a kind of a tension between like research that you might want to, or sort of more classical preparations that you might want to do, and then the extent to which this film could probably just draw on things from your from your life, and how those two things commingle to yield these characters you're playing. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about how this collaboration proceeded?
I think it was mainly because I looked identical to Kathleen. And Sarah probably noticed that in photos and contacted me as the perfect relative, right? Because we look so much alike.
I think you were hired before I was, but that's okay. Because I looked like you.
There were several other actors before Kathleen, which we don't need to get into, but that was... what was the question?
I was just generally
right.
about the collaboration.
I met Sarah, we met before, I would say, a long time before the beginning of the shooting in this lengthy pre-production that Sarah went through. Part of which was choosing the actor, choosing Kathleen. And we had a couple of discussions about my character, and then, as Kathleen said, we just sort of talked about other random things that we had in connection, our Jewish heritage and architecture in Los Angeles and things of that nature. And I don't know, it was a very loose, we had a little bit of discussion about Steve and about the ways in which family approaches dealing with this transition. And we talked a lot about the first scene, obviously, which was my pivotal scene. Thank you. And about how I would have been coached a little bit to prepare her and myself for that moment, with a bit of trickery and so forth, and yeah, that's how it started. And then when we began filming, I mean, obviously, what you saw on the screen was just the ease in which it was working with Kathleen, especially, and with Sarah there, sort of allowing this to happen. It was just very organic and natural, and I just had to watch Kathleen work, really, and react to that. So that was beautiful. Yeah.
And Carolyn, what about you? Maybe it's especially with this extra layer of this kind of like professional or vocational layer of what your character has to be vis-a-vis Kathleen's character. How the collaboration proceed for you?
So with Sarah, we've known each other for quite a while in a beautiful, blessed, creative way. I was really fortunate to meet Sarah working on a project with Steve McQueen some years back, and we met while working together on set and forged a really great friendship. And I think we bonded especially through our relationship for her grandmother, for myself, my mother, who both experienced dementia. I was my mother's caregiver for about a year before getting her into the Actors Fund home in Englewood, New Jersey, and New Directors, New Films happens to be the same festival in which my mother was in Home Exercises, Sarah's film that was here as well too. So it's a nice full circle moment. In terms of research specifically, we were really fortunate to be able to have the guidance and support of a CNA who was able to assist me with questions that I had about like what would care look like, what would a standard day look like, what are some sort of just communication styles, relationship patterns that exist with CNAs and current residents of facilities like these, and that was super helpful. It gave me a sense of the environment and what to anticipate, and also, Kathleen is a joy to work with. You know what I mean? She's just so easeful and full of grace, and so I think a lot of what we all forged was just in really, as a team, collectively trusting each other. That opening scene where Jon is bringing her into the facility for the first time was the first day that I had a chance to work with you. And just your presence and understanding of what that moment really was made me think of my mom and dropping her off the very first day as well, too. And so I think for anyone universally seeing this film, they will understand these experiences.
And maybe I'll ask you one more thing and we'll see what the audience wants to know. Well, I mean, one thing that struck me again in looking at the film tonight was, I think people have talked about the tonality of the film and how, like, it's never cut and dry. It's never black and white. It's always operating in this kind of this other register that maybe is distinctly yours. I don't know, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you manage that and your sort of sensitivity to tonality and how scenes are like they're funny and sad and relatable and strange and all these things simultaneously, and it's very it's a unique combination of sensations as an audience member, but it's also kind of just like life, maybe. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about about that balance?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so I'd say the first kind of adjustment around tone came when I was working as a caregiver. I worked as a caregiver for New York City artists with dementia for about 4 years part-time. And my experience working with my clients was so much at odds with the tone of most depictions of aging, and specifically aging with memory loss. There was so much absurdity, so much poetry, so many uncanny moments in our days together. And so that was the kind of first clue for me that there had to be this kind of malleable tone to it. But then I think it really kind of was further affirmed by our collaboration with the care facility that we worked with. So while it's a scripted film, we made it in collaboration with Villa Gardens, which is a real care facility in Pasadena. And myself and some of our cast, Carolyn, and some of our crew facilitated a workshop for the residents there to make their own films and learn filmmaking soup to nuts for 5 weeks. And then they and the care workers there joined our cast and crew. I think we had residents and staff working in every department except maybe the grip department. No one signed up to be a grip, but unfortunately. But the residents, we went through a process where the residents and the staff had to green light the film before we could film there. And when we did that, I got to have sort of a million cooks in the kitchen saying, it has to be funny, but we're not laughing at them, we're laughing with them. And if it's absurd, it has to be strange. And there were all of these kind of subtle, like, dial shifts that were expressed to me. And so in my mind, you know, it was already on the page to a certain extent, but then being there, we were basically in residence there for 9 weeks. And so that experience, I think, really informed how we filmed, especially with the humorous moments. Those are all real residents that are acting alongside the three of them. There are a few professional actors, but a lot of the kind of funnier moments are real residents, and so they sort of led us in terms of getting that humor right. So I think those experiences really informed the tone.
Like I said, we're pressed for time, so we're going to take audience questions now. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone, and we're going to start right there.
Hi there. Great film. Really enjoyed it. Thank you all. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about putting together that cooking scene. I thought that was really beautiful and just another great use of movement throughout the film, and it reminded me a lot of The Bear as I was watching it, like aging home edition. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how that came about and kind of the role of cooking and food throughout the film.
So in terms of cooking, at first I thought Ruth might be an artist or a writer, and then I realized I wanted her kind of form of self-expression to appeal to all of her senses, because I think something that people don't understand about memory loss is as much as your cognition declines, your other senses are intensified. So I wanted her professional life and her creative life to really be, you know, olfactory, gustatory, tactile. We were incredibly fortunate to work with the cook and cookbook author Molly Katzen, thank you, who is here tonight. And she collaborated with our production designer, Stephanie Osen-Cohen, in really designing it. Yeah, it's her to clap. Yes, for Stephanie as well. The two of them really collaborated closely in building sort of the archive that you see in Ruth's house. And, you know, every other sheet is either Molly's real archive and something that Stephanie created. And so a lot of Ruth's recipes, like the borscht, are Molly's recipes from the Moosewood cookbook, because we really wanted to place Ruth in this sort of specific time and milieu of women cooks, you know, specifically a Jewish woman cook, kind of coming of age in this countercultural moment. And so Molly worked with Steph to really design those meals, and then also to train Kathy in her knife skills, which maybe you can speak to.
I learned a very important thing about knives. As a person who's cooked for a long time and thought I sort of had a grip on it, I was taught that the important thing about control of a knife is to feel the steel. And I have discovered, it's changed my life, changed the life in my kitchen. If you do have to be careful when you're feeling the steel. You do have to be careful that this finger doesn't go under the steel. Because Molly was wonderful and immensely patient, and we made we were talking about it before outside, maybe 50 versions of the first sandwich, but it's really, really tricky to do that with grapefruits. And we went through a lot of grapefruits. So I hope you were convinced.
Hi, thank you. Great work. Loved the movie. There were many things that jumped out at me, but Sarah, I was just curious, what drove you to write that scene where Ray and Vanessa are kind of having their smoke break and talking about their own parents? And I think Ray kind of, hinted at that he can't quite get the same kind of treatment for her mom, and like being in the world that they can't quite exist in, but kind of putting a brave face and kind of living in that space.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one of the challenges of the kind of balance of this film was we needed to stay in Ruth's world, but I wanted to know, about the experiences of caregiving and aging, of Vanessa, Brian, and Steve, and so sort of finding the balance of how to understand what's going on with those three characters without sort of bursting the bubble of being in Ruth's world. And the reality is that the care facility that Ruth enters is, gives a level of care that maybe 3-4% of Americans at most can access. And I spent a lot of time with the caregivers there, and so many of them, most of them can't afford the quality of care that the people they're caring for have. And so that scene was, trying to sort of situate us within the way in which care is classed and racialized and, not a public good in America in the way that it should be. And so I wanted to do that without it being too didactic. And I guess just to ground us in this current moment, I'll just say Congress is currently trying to cut several $1 trillion from Medicaid. And Medicaid provides home care for 54 million older adults and people with disabilities in America. So just to say, it's a moment where access to older adult care is becoming even more scarce when it should become, I think, basically public infrastructure. So, we shot that scene 2 years ago, and things have only gotten far scarier in terms of access to older adult care in America.
It's the second to last row.
All right, thanks so much to all of you. I wondered if you could speak about your collaboration with your cinematographer and what kinds of things you were aiming for, if there are specific films or looks or other things you spoke about and aimed for.
Yeah. So I'm very fortunate that I've gotten to collaborate with the same cinematographer, Gabe Elder, and the same production designer, Stephanie Cohen, for 10 years now. And the three of us have sort of developed a shared visual language. We've made all of our shorts together. And I think we really, what I was mentioning earlier, this idea that older adults with memory loss experience a cognitive decline, but their other senses intensify. We wanted to find a visual language for that and to kind of identify Ruth's selfhood, not in her mind, but kind of through her body and through her sensations and feelings. And so that concept was really at the core of how we thought about framing the film. So, a lot of static shots and a sort of kind of stillness that allowed us to pick up on the subtlest details in their expressions and body language. Gabe did an extraordinary job, I think, of working with Cedric Chung Lao, our gaffer, in basically using a lot of practical light and natural light because we were working in a real care facility. We did have lighting, but we had to work with quite little. We couldn't have any tracks on the ground. So those limitations became a kind of creative challenge for us, if you will.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think we're all feeling very inspired, so thank you so much. I just wanted to ask about the other side, sound design. It was very, very clearly very nuanced and subtle, but I think very intentional, it seemed. And unless I missed something, I didn't hear any explicit score either. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that and the reasons behind that. Thank you.
Yeah, I worked with a brilliant sound designer named Eli Cohen, who I think is probably in the room somewhere. There he is. And I think the thing that Eli was so skilled at doing is really registering Ruth's loss of home through sound. And so we spent a lot of time together talking about what was the soundscape of her home so that the viewer might sort of subconsciously register that loss of the familiarity of those sounds. And I surveyed the residents that I worked with about what sounds they most noticed when they first moved into this institutional space that kind of registered for them as like that shift. And so it was the sounds of work happening at regular hours, whether that was landscaping or hearing walkie-talkies. It was the sound of an HVAC, of air conditioning, having to fill a massive space. Some of them talked to me about how they feared the sound of ambulances because it meant maybe one of their friends was not doing well, or heaven forbid it was coming for them. And so Eli and I sort of took this list of sounds and made these kind of 2 different soundscapes. But then the thing, I think one of the most exciting parts for me about collaborating with him was these moments when Ruth is having these kind of intensified sensory experiences, he really found this kind of musical language for that, but from the diegetic sounds of the space. So I think we worked, I mean, you don't have a mic, Eli, otherwise I would just kick it to you, but I think we sort of, he built a lot of layers, and we would sort of start with something that was mundane and then kind of keep pulling out sort of these musical tones from the diegetic sound, and then really, letting the Dionne Warwick swell was kind of our reward at the end of playing with all of the diegetic sound. But yeah, the credit goes to Eli for the beautiful work.
So basically we have to leave it there, but is there anyone else you want to shout
Well,
out?
we want to shout out our producer, Alexandra Beyer, who's amazing because she got her appendix out 24 hours ago, and she still managed to show up with a phenomenal outfit and support us all. So and to the rest of our cast and crew as well, but specifically to that gal who made it out of the hospital in here.
I would like to say one more thing we've been talking about Medicare and what's happening all around us. And if you were moved by this movie, if it touches your life in any way, please find some way on April 5th, next Saturday, to go to the streets.
I think that's an excellent sentiment to leave this on. So thank you all for this very beautiful, moving film. Thank all of you, and yeah, I don't know. Let's have a good festival.